Dear ladies and gentlemen, guests of our event, we are happy to welcome you at Decarbonisation Talks, our event which is dedicated to investments and technologies which will replace coal generation. Before we begin our event, let me introduce co-moderators of this event. My name is Alexei Feliv. I am a managing partner of international law company Integrities, and within our company I mostly deal with projects related to alternative energy, renewables, and also I'm a leader of the climate change task force. Together with me, this event will be co-moderated by my colleague Oleg Zagnitko. Oleg is a head of co-chair of the banking finance practice, and together he's working on the projects related to power, electric power, and also renewables. He is also a leading consultant who participates actively in the development of industry legislation related to the market of electric power. Several words. Why Integrities? Why Decarbonisation Talks? Because we as a law company, for the last 10 years we are working on projects of renewables, and for us it's quite logic to move to transit from sources which are alternative to broader spectrum and related to the replacement of CO2 technologies in general. And topics we would like to discuss during our decarbonization talks. First of all, about the replacement of fossil fuels, smart grid or smart energy power system, and also transition to a green economy, and which is probably the trend all over the world. Within the company, we got together into the climate change task force, 6 teams, 6 partners who focus on the projects of renewable energy, projects related to accumulation of energy and also flexible powers, and also other projects, energy efficiency projects related to reduction of CO2 in big industrial producers. A very short video about our climate change task force. Please show the video. Thank you for this introduction of our climate change task force, which is a logical continuation of the development of our main focus as a company around the projects related to decarbonization. Nevertheless, this event we organize not alone. We have co-organizers. There is a Finnish company, Wärtsilä, and we would like to thank Wärtsilä for supporting our initiative, and that they participate in our event, and they co-organized it. Our goal, together with Wärtsilä, to have a series of decarbonization talks, and we will have a subject discussions on decarbonization, because we would like to voice out decisions which will help Ukraine Ukrainian economy to move to a green side. And before we go to panelists and brief presentations, on behalf of me and Oleg, we have several words about a driver or a base for decarbonization in Ukraine. Please show me the presentation. There are political drivers. They are important as never before. And with the new leadership in the US, we see that the US is coming back to Paris Agreement, Paris Treaty, and a Green Deal was approved in the US and EU, and also last year in the Ministry of Energy in Ukraine, that by 2050 these main countries, EU declares in the part of continental, they speak about the continent, they would like to move completely no CO2 generation. This is about integration of Ukraine to NATO and EU. Decarbonization at present is a priority. No, maybe the first priority, but has an important place on the agenda. And also it's a political economic driver of CBM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which was approved within a Green Deal of EU. And the point is that the goods which will be imported to EU from countries which provide a different level of decarbonization and comparing not the same level of decarbonization like in the EU, they will tax them. There will be additional fee when they import their goods. In Ukraine, 40% of our products we export to EU. We will not be aside of this process. The tax should be introduced in 2023, and for Ukraine it's just a question of time, sooner or later, when from more general political statements we will have to take concrete steps for our economy to become more green, or otherwise we will lose competition in the world markets and other factors and drivers. Oleg, the floor is yours. Thank you, Alexei. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Four main drivers or resources or the factors, they are here and they overlap each other. They don't allow or they encourage a quick growth of green part in the energy of Ukraine, or power, electric power in Ukraine. What do we have on the other side? There's a WTO agreement that we joined more than 10 years ago, and we cannot discriminate in our support or neglect goals of reduction of CO2. We have an agreement on free trade agreement with the EU, DCFTA, and also we need to update our legislation to harmonize and including emission and standards of heat thermal generation. We have a technical agreement on synchronization with the grid, European grid, but also we are working on the base of the document, and we also work according to the agreement of integral energy system of Ukraine and integral energy system of Russian Federation. We have a national plan of reduction of emission, and we will speak about that, of course. And in addition to that, we have the rules of the market of electric power, and that is a financial part of the story. And when the market doesn't work, then we have there are some duties to satisfy interest, PSO. Then we have, for the sake of what we got together here, we have we diagnose and change. So there's a physical part of integrated power systems in Ukraine. We have started the integration. The coal is getting away, but before I use this phrase, I have to explain. The coal generation plays a very important, substantial role in our power system. We have nuclear generation. We consume, for example, like this, of nuclear power as much as we could fit into the glass. That couldn't be. This is nuclear power. Then we can fill it with green energy, it seems like. Nevertheless, the issue of security forces us to add a little bit of power that we get from coal TPP, and it's impossible to stop that. And also there is also there is some kind of there are some other sources and which depend on weather. Coal energy, and I come from a coal region. I grew up there and I was working in the Donetsk, that is a mining region. It's very important. So mining coal is very important for us. But coal technologies are losing economically and politically, as Alexei told. They have to go into the past. Because Ukraine could disrupt its trade with the European partners, for example. Luckily, electric power, is considered geographically narrowly, so it's Ukraine and neighbors. And how we can connect in the Black Sea region with other countries. But Ukraine, we have two zones. Burштyn Island, which is synchronized with NSOE, and ENTSO, and the other part which is synchronized with Russia and gets technical assistance from that side. So could be prepared quickly a replacement for coal generation. Could we comply with the national plan of reduction of emissions? That also depends on the funds, on the resources. We can speak about money, finances, and we can discuss where we can get the resources, people, materials, who will construct and who will bring other technologies. Who will connect our country with and we see with the help of import and export they will flatten this balance, and they will replace the role of coal generation. Maybe that will happen. Maybe that will be stipulated by or regulated by the rules on the market. Maybe it will come from a PSO. There is no direct answer to this question. So with this, we would like to move to the discussion. The discussion will be like this. I will introduce panelists and I will ask them to answer the question. A short question for all, the same for all. And then we'll have a time for 10 minutes presentation of each panelist. After that, after every presentation, moderators can ask 1-2 questions, and then after presentations we'll move to interactive communication, and panelists will be able to ask direct questions, and also our viewers. Write it to our Facebook, to WhatsApp, send your questions to YouTube. We will read those questions. That's why we have phones here. So when I look at the phone, that's I wanted to read your questions. That's what it means. So our speakers, our panelists, we were able to bring together stakeholders from different segments of this problem. First of all, Deputy Head Minister of Energy, Maxim Nemchimov. Mr. Nemchimov, Deputy Minister, could you give a brief answer to the question? Green coal paradox, as it is called. Should it stay with us until the end of this decade? Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear participants. I hope that you hear me well. And I was not able to connect full on, but I see that there is no technical issue anymore. So you see, it's a very good question about to which extent we will have this coal paradox. And everything will depend, on my opinion, how the market of electric power will work, how it will allow us to invest in new generation, in new technologies. So that's why if the state will propose some mechanism to fund new generation, which will be able to replace coal generation. At present, that is under the question, and you understand that quite well. Implementation implementation of the national plan to reduce emissions. It's also a very complicated issue, very difficult plan. So the plan, this plan, we can comply with in two ways. So we can hold, we could hold ecological modernization, and we can provide the work of units of generation. We could have only ecologically clean generation, or we can take these coal units from operation, and in that way to provide to reduce the number of emission on that level that we would like we signed under which. So the second variant for us is unacceptable, because then we will have a big energy power deficit, and there will be a threat to the stability of the work of the power system. So the system operator will have to reduce the number of consumers just to prevent accidents. Dear Deputy Minister, thank you. I would like to ask the same question to all, and then we'll go to your presentation, if you don't mind. Next. Igor Petek, Director on the Development of Markets, Wärtsilä Energy in Eastern Europe. Good morning, Igor. In your opinion, your company helps us to hold this event, and also helps with in other countries, in many countries, with the transition to green. So for how long Ukraine can stay with this coal paradox until the end of this decade, sooner or later? What do you think? As Mr. Nemchimonov told, that depends on funding and how to raise, how to find that money to finance some activities. But in my presentation, I will tell you about scenarios which there could be and how different that they are. So I would divide two things: a political component, and also technical side. And technical is related to cost of decisions that were taken. So I would like to move my answer to the time of my presentation. That's an intrigue. Thank you very much. We'll support this intrigue. After here we'll have Vitaly Zaychenko, Director on Management of Integrated Power Systems of Ukraine, main dispatcher NEC Ukrenergo. Vitaly, once there was a number like 4 gigawatt of power. That's what Ukrainian power system can stand, can tolerate. So the paradox became true. We use completely coal generation, and also we limit also some other resources. Could we renewables? Could we go like this for 10 more years? So what's your approach? What's your take on this? Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for the invitation to the discussion. I would like to say, first of all, that the formulation of this paradox called green, it came from NEC Ukrenergo. It's originated here, and it says that there is such a situation when for enlarging generation on renewables, from renewables, we needed to enlarge we needed to also enlarge generation on TPPs and other plants that use coal. I disagree with this formulation with coal green paradox, because at present, considering changes in the legislation, it doesn't exist. Because for us not to limit energy atom and to enlarge the part of renewables, and they don't give CO2 emission, and as a systemic operator we reduce the load of from renewables, and we do it in a way to accept their generation as much as possible. Can we take it to the system, not to limit them? We would like to improve flexibility, and that's the main issue we would like to discuss today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that you have heard some introductory comments from all of our speakers, may I now invite Deputy Minister Nemchinov for a more detailed presentation. You may recall that the ministry has, in the past few years, changed several leaders, but in between it presented the Green Deal, changed conditions for the new bidders, introduced amendments to the emission reduction plan, eliminated even the name carbon or coal ministry from their name. Deputy Minister. Thank you again. First of all things, us as the ministry in charge of the public policy in this area, we have to always be mindful about our energy security and our energy independence. In other words, the entire power sector should respect these principles. So, taking no heed of all the risks while reforming our system, the risks that may involve loss of energy security and independence, would not be prudent. We are all aware of these risks, whether they are obvious or less so. The coal industry, well, is not hasn't been efficient for quite some time now, and to expect that it'd be economically viable and balanced is not wise, at least where private industries have been faring fairly well. Public sector enterprises were quite the opposite, and we should remember about our international commitments under the Paris Agreement, the Green Deal, the commitments in favor of the green transition and reduction of actual elimination of fossil fuel generation. That said, the changes can't be achieved overnight. I understand that other speakers will probably speak in favor of changing the balancing capacity, the coal-fired ones, to natural gas fired capacities, but this may in itself pose a serious risk to our energy security and our energy independence insofar as domestic gas extraction is not sufficient to cover for the needs of this generation. That'll increase our dependence on imports, and wherever we try to maintain the volumes of natural gas transit via Ukraine, they may be reduced, and so that we can even experience shortfall of natural gas. Therefore, to hope that our generation will support gas balancing is, a disputable statement, to say the least. Therefore, we are now working rather hard to consider options related to energy storage, to hydrogen, and its wider use in power production, though we understand that they are quite expensive technologies, which limits their efficiency in the market. They are more expensive than wind and solar, but of course technologies are developing, so when the technologies are mature and start to multiply, the cost will unquestionably go down. We have all seen that with the implementation of solar, where initially 1 megawatt was over 1 million euros. Currently, it's 650,000 euros a megawatt, and probably hydrogen will follow that suit in the future. But what is clear that this is not as fast-paced as we expect. So coal generation will continue, and therefore we have to see how we can make it more, well, environmentally friendly to comply with our international commitments and obligations. Also, let me highlight yet another area in which our ministry is working actively. This is increasing power use efficiency. This is overall reduction of power consumption, of electricity consumption, but all these efforts should be cognizant of the needs of economic growth, so that we didn't have to estimate economic growth that should affect power consumption, and on the other hand we declare our wish to reduce electricity consumption. Of course, electricity consumption should be reduced where it is not efficient enough if compared to Poland, to Germany, or rather EU nations where so this is where we also look at, and not only look at, but work towards. But this is a very brief, so to speak, contribution to the topic being discussed. If there are any questions, I'd be ready to handle them. And to sum up, if I may, I would like to ask you the following question. Your overview is fairly well grim. The ministry, I understand, is trying to maintain the status quo. We will, in effect, default on our emission reduction, or you speak about modernization, storage, hydrogen, but gas will be reduced. No, look, the second part of your finding sounds true to the reality. 2 gigawatts gas might be quite relevant. They won't, gas will not be used as much as it is now, just to cover peak load, and this won't negatively affect the balance on gas consumption. As far as your first bullet point is concerned, I would most vehemently disagree. The ministry is not just sitting on the fence. No, we are working very diligently to help Ukraine achieve our emission reduction plan. Yes, the schedules, the riders should probably be revised insofar as they were drafted back in 2012, 2013, and then it took another 5 years because of the European bureaucratic procedures, and we were initially looking at upgrading some of our plans that are now in the temporarily occupied territories. In the opt-out section you can see plants that were uh, changed to fire the fuels that are extracted in the government controlled territories. So we'll be putting our bets on the ecological upgrade of the plants that whose life may still be long. Conversely, we won't upgrade those plants that are not capable of operating efficiently and, so to speak, bound for retirement. The upgraded plants should have a sufficiently long service life. Plus, to identify the minimum number of the plants, we have to take stock of those plants that are absolutely necessary for the system. Plus, we are also working on sources of financing the upgrade in question. That is to say, we will only start doing what is absolutely necessary, not just to achieve some of the goals that were set 9 or 10 years ago that have become obsolescent. We also understand that the plants provided they're supplied with the necessary resource would work for some time in the future. And third, the funding mechanisms, who's gonna pay to be brief. So whilst I disagree with the first part of your finding, the second part, well, is indeed what you say. There is no sufficient resources to replace coal with gas. We just don't have enough output. You must have been reading my lips because I have another question to ask. Which tools do you think the ministry has in order to support upgrade and introduction of new generation? Because PSO are imposed by, well, the Cabinet of Ministers and the law, Article 29. So are you planning on using these tools or thinking of some new, more innovative? As a matter of principle, you are right. We are short of leverage because the National Commission, the regulator, sets the rules. We only shape the public policy. But this is quite an influential thing. We are planning to revise our energy strategy in order to update it, because in the meantime certain obligations have been undertaken. We would also like to, well, initiate legislation on the proper financing mechanisms, including the so-called green transition and eco modernization. We are, well, in a discussion with the national regulator in order to see whether the current market conditions will accommodate sources of this description. We understand that, for instance, FIFOR output or some other mechanism can be introduced insofar as in Europe and in other jurisdictions you have tools like this, quite good tools if you ask me. So jointly with the national regulator would be able to identify effective tools that'll help us respect our commitments and obligations and support changes in the system. Maxim, can I ask you another question regarding the mechanisms to finance, well, carbon tax, which is something on the surface, plus certificates of origin. So speaking of those certificates of origin, are there any new developments in this respect? In particular, in the light of the CBAM introduction, because it would give preference to the green energy. Well, we are looking at both options. Tax. Well, there's one issue here. Following our logic, following our understanding of the situation, it would be right if this tax is ever introduced to be generating revenues to a special fund that would support changes in the generation. Unfortunately, there are conflicting views. Not everyone would be happy to make this tax revenues only available for upgrades in the system, though regarding certificates of origin, yes, we are looking at this option. I am not sure that this is something that we'd be able to develop and introduce pretty fast, but this is indeed an effective mechanism. Yes, fear of capacity. If we say that the renewables can be used to balance the system, they should pay to someone who can do that. That is to say, certain capacity should be reserved, standing by for utilization. Energy storage crosses my mind right away, but as our studies have shown, energy storage is good for ancillary services, for frequency balancing. It'd take, well, I mean, energy storage won't probably be available for balancing the grid. First of all, you have to charge them with something. That is to say, generation should be sufficient, should be adequate. Second, you should have a significant amount of these sources, which makes me conclude that this is not the fastest and problem-free path. So, comprehensive, holistic approach, if I may, purporting the introduction of a number of mechanisms. Well, more likely than not. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Minister, for the thoughts you shared, and I hope that they will be implemented in certain regulatory or legal acts. Our next presenter is Ihor Patrick from Wärtsilä, Eastern Europe, and a co-convener of this event. The floor is yours, Ihor. Thank you. Can you copy me? Yes, we can copy you. Let me show a very short, so to speak, presentation. But before I do that, could I also offer a comment? Well, you have 10 minutes. Use it as you like, as you see fit. we did some modeling a while ago, looking at different scenarios, including a scenario based on retirement of coal-fired and replacement. And interestingly, this would mean increasing gas consumption, but 44 petajoules. That is to say, just a billion cubic meters. So against the backdrop of the total consumption, 30 billion, 1 billion is not a critical amount, if you ask me. But let us look why so. If I may, could we bring up my presentation? Next slide. So we're talking about coal-fired generation and its fate in our life, not share. Around 30% of power is generated using firing coal, plus coal generation is in the balancing game, and so there are two major options: retirement, phase out, or the eco upgrade. If we compare different scenarios, there should then exist a way, a mechanism of finding the differences between scenarios or their appropriateness in respect of, say, cost of power for the users. Will we have enough capacity to generate electricity plus reserves to maintain stability of the system? Which capacities, which technologies more specifically should be used for replacement? And if we talk about decarbonization, what outcomes can we expect if either of the options is implemented? So these are there are methods to help make comparisons like that. We've done that with regard to over 140 systems around the world. We have been working with different stakeholders, including Ukraine. We're trying to be of help we use Plexus for this purpose. It's a software complex that can simulate the operation of power systems with a high degree of accuracy. So this past May we concluded a big study in which we looked at various scenarios for the entire system for the period of 10 years. Why 10 years? Because this is exactly the planning horizon to which Ukrenergo sticks to. So we also wanted to use any data which is in public domain, capacity adequacy and evaluation report. So upgrade and retirement or phase out, all in. There were 7 scenarios, but the breakdown would be for 2. So all the capacities of all the units with all the characteristics, such as the startup cost for each unit. You also estimate demand for 10 years, the necessary reserves, and various performance characteristics inherent in all generation and storage technologies, with all the appropriate costs. We estimate the capex for 10 years, economical, technical indicators, characteristics. Next, then the model formulates them as a mathematical module, and then you arrive at the least cost options in the end. And we are talking about well, the cost efficiency of the electricity generated using diverse scenarios. In the end, you have the optimized setup of equipment for generation, storage, and the cost of dispatching for the entire planning horizon. The hourly loads are taken into account, as is the case now. Now let me show you the key slide, so to speak, of my presentation. You can see here the relevant scenarios by 2031, the zero scenario, so to speak, retirement without replacement. Unviable scenario, as Mr. Maximov indicated, because it had produced capacity shortfall. According to our modeling, the shortfall will surface in 2025, and later it'll be higher than the imports. So by 2031, the shortfall will amount to 14 gigawatts. So we looked at this scenario, but there is no point in discussing it any further. So our next scenario is eco modernization, eco upgrade that Maxim also mentioned. According to our scenario, it will involve modernization of those plants that are in the National Emission Reduction Plan, and according to the same schedule. In other words, Plexus was tasked with predicting the timeline for modernization of these plants. By 2031, they'll gonna remain about 2 gigawatts of unupgraded. So the coal generation remains, well, less 2 units that would have been retired anyway. So the rest is what Plexus did, taking into account the available coal-fired generation. Nuclear are in the system. They are included in the system, but for ease of perception, they are removed from this slide. So pump stations, well, some hydro and pump stations will increase output, but we were mostly interested in seeing how much of other capacities will have to be introduced in order to cover the demand and stability of the system. Plexus, as you can see, offers a lot in capacity building regarding renewables, wind in the first place, solar a little bit later. But generally we see that, well, by 2031 you have solar and 12 plus and wind 13 gigawatts plus battery storage, though limited capacity. By 2027 short-term battery capacities to be used in ancillary service, and only later Plexus is looking at 8-hour batteries plus gas generation, 1.4 generation open cycle, and 9 9 gigawatts of ICE. Well, the gas turbines will be mostly used as peakers and ramped up to very infrequently. IC will be used quite actively in power generation, but again, most of the time in the balancing mode with step-by-step reduction of this role. And there's, well, another scenario, phase out with replacement. This is a scenario different from the previous one because Plexus here wasn't tasked to, so to speak, obligatorily retire, but rather to find what would be the best possible, so to speak, use. Here you see significant changes in flexibility, many more batteries, many more ICs, and a significant amount of GTs. Solar and wind remain about the same. So these two scenarios are very similar, and we can only find what is better if we look at the cost in each option. In 2031, the cost of system under scenario 1 is likely to be 600 million USD less. In addition, it'll generate 40% less emission. The total saving 6.4 billion over the period of time, plus 24% less CO2 emission. As far as the additional capacity, not much difference. 2 gigawatts of wind, solar 1, accumulators. And next slide, please. So the conclusion is that upgrade is less efficient than retirement, phase out plus and replacement. In both cases, additional capacities will be needed, and the optimal system better suited for future needs, because it'll have less demand on carbon tax, about $2 billion US difference. So no hard feelings. We all have our stereotypes, as it were, but the tool we are using helps us discard the stereotypes before we make any decisions, including investment decisions. We can use the findings, and I'm sorry to have used a little bit more time. Thank you.
Thank you, it was very interesting. And I'm quite sincere on this, despite the fact that you are our co-organizer. I have to make one announcement. We have more time for the third presenter, panelist, because Yaroslav Mudryk was planning to be the last. He was not able to make it, so because of his own plans, and he's abroad, so he was not able to make it. But coming back to your presentation, Igor, I have to tell that you speak like a partner of Ukrenergo together, because you are planning according, you make plans according to the reports. And here's the question. In your presentation, you apply gas technologies, turbine technologies, and also solar panels. describing the elephant in the room. Why three technologies? Because your company is working only with two, supplies only solutions for two generations, types of generation. Look, I love to compare Plexus with MLT. If in the hospital, if your hospital specializes on the pulmonology, on lung diseases, then that hospital is using X-ray equipment. Of course, nobody is thinking about that. There is a conflict of interest because with the help of that X-ray equipment, they look for a job for themselves. They find a job for themselves. So we have such X-ray machine, and it did diagnostics. It found some problems in the patient, and if the part of those problems could be treated with the help of our hospital, we are very happy with that. But if there are some additional by diseases not found, and then we need to go, the patient should go to a different doctor, we don't mind. Our reputation will only get stronger from that if we are objective. As to why different technologies? Because they have different functions. Batteries, first of all, that's an auxiliary sources, and only in the end of the decade they can provide. So not services, but they can earn on transmitting power and balancing. And gas turbine stations, or gas piston station plants, they have a different use, and they have different features. And as I told you, gas turbine will be in reserve. They will be used only as peakers, and gas plants will be balancers. And we have a video. If you have time, it will be great to have to spend 2 minutes and to see the difference between these plants. Gas engine bring the needed flexibility and efficiency to the power systems. Intermittency of solar and wind power generation requires a compensation to keep a power system in balance. Sometimes fluctuations are sudden, and then some flexible capacity should turn on very quickly. When fluctuations last long, flexible source energy prices should remain reasonable. The job is best done by fast and efficient power plants that are called flexible balancing plants. The activation of balancers happens daily, hundreds or even hundreds of times a year. Unlike peakers that have been used in traditional power systems, they are to cover high peaks demands caused by accidents or weather irregularities. Historically, peakers made a limited number of annual starts. For them, fuel efficiency and the starting costs are not so significant. The typical capacity factors of below 10%. They used to be open cycle gas turbine plants. Balancer is a new type of capacity which did not exist before, but now is needed due to the rapid growth of wind and solar renewable energy sources. It operates in pulses every day, starts and stops in even 2 minutes. No impact on service schedules due to start-ups, loading and shutdowns. High availability due to multi-unit solutions, has no on very low starting cost. Has highest fuel efficiency and operational flexibility, widest regulation range. Has a typical capacity factor of up to 40%. Internal combustion gas engine power plants meet these criteria the best. The recent decades gas engines technology has significantly developed. Medium speed engine efficiency has reached 50%. And that is the highest rate among all prime movers in simple cycle. As of 1980, gas engines became a more efficient technology than gas turbines. This trend is set to continue in the future. These units are attractive for investment due to best balancing and peaking capability. Long lifetime and low operating and maintenance cost, as well as a possibility of phased investing. It is a future-proof technology which already today meets requirements of the common systems and will enable easy integration of renewables such as wind and solar for energy transition in the future. Thank you, Yuri. You spoke about investment attraction. It's a very good point. I would like to verify from Yaroslav maybe another time. To which extent Ukrainian conditions and prices on the market are attractive for investments? How these mechanisms which we have in our legislation, and maybe it was mentioned by the Deputy Minister, how that will be helpful to introduce scenarios that are provided by you in your simulation. First of all, we understand that the best tool to invest is private investment. That's the best instrument, and probably that's the only possible scenario. Of course, we have our own calculations, and this week we tested a financial model, and it comes out that according to the prices that are now present, in order for gas piston station plant to pay back and to be the one thing is lacking, that is about 30 euro per megawatt hour of electric power. So that's why this is approximately that part which is about heat thermal tariff for Teplocommunenерго. That's why if this is a plant of cogeneration which is working for centralized systems of heating systems, that it seems like such a plant pays back if it produces power and heat, but if it's working only to produce power and for auxiliary services, then as I told you, there is insufficient part of revenue which doesn't allow to pay back, to have profitability of those investments. It should be resolved somehow, or it could be resolved in through mechanism of that are used in EU tools, CRM tools, capacity remuneration mechanism. So to support, it's also to support generation or the market of generation. We know that in all European countries they have such a tool to support the capacity. Generation doesn't go up without them, and even co-generation doesn't work well. Thank you. I would like to comment that the recommendation of the EU is not to support all technologies with the help of such instruments. That's maybe I pass back to Maxim. But before we move to the presentation of Vitaly Zaychenko, I would like to welcome our Yuri Hnatyuk, our Facebook audience. How much gas is used within the scenarios of your model, of your simulations? Could you give us the number of gas which is used there? Of course, in the scenario of full modernization or full upgrade, about 3 billion cubic meters, and including gas TPP, and when we phase out coal generation, there is 4 billion cubic meters. Thank you. Yuri, write your questions. Your questions are very good. And we move to the final report. And after that, I hope that they will have enough of time for questions, answers, if there will be such. I invite Vitaly Zaychenko, who is who will tell us about the report on adequacy of generation capacity for the next years. And we've heard about from the director, and also from Patrick. We've heard a little bit about that. So, Vitaly, the floor is yours. Thank you, Oleg. Please put my presentation on the monitor. I was planning. It was very difficult to select the name. Is it the report of adequacy of generating capacity, or just before the 20 minutes of the conference, the report was approved by the regulator. It's a report in force. Then, as Ukrenergo and the regulator will take a decision about the future fate of our power systems. Next point. Briefly, I would like to tell you about our company, Ukrenergo. We are operator of the system of transmission, though at present, and we are non-certified according to European procedures, but we are on the road to certification. All legislation is ready, is prepared, and so the process is on. The main function is to balance generation and consumption of power in real-time mode, and operation and development of major grids, and plan and development of power system to provide parallel work of the grid with the systems of neighboring countries, and to provide technical opportunities for export and import of electric power with our neighbors. In order to use the function of to implement our functions annually, we develop a report like this, and as to adequacy of generating capacity. On the base of the results of this, we prepare proposals to the development of the network of the grid, of transmission grid, and also to how to take a new capacity to the grid, and how to develop interconnections between countries, and on generating capacity in Ukraine, and also proposals to of amendments to the code and to the rules on the market, and also we stand with the initiatives and as to amendments even to some laws of Ukraine. Next slide. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that in principle it was mentioned by Oleg and Mr. Demchinov that our power system in all the country is recently under the pressure. Though is not an exception. We are not an exception for in the world, because all power systems they are under the pressure of external factors, which we have in the modern world. So we need to next slide, please. Transformation of power systems that is happening all the time in our system, in the grid. It brings into turbulence in economy and also in the power sector. In Ukraine, we passed some commitments, approved some commitments, and the national plan to reduce emission. And the other commitment is a national input to Paris Agreement, or commitment to Paris Agreement, and also quite ambitious goals about a green transition. So, but still, there is a problem of insufficient or absence of funding to finance those activities which are necessary to cover the commitments, to comply with the commitments. And also there was asymmetrical development of power in Ukraine, electric power in Ukraine. Quickly there was a development of renewables, one segment only. There is a solar plants. Less quickly there was a wind generation, but also there's a reduction of installed capacity on the peak plants, and we understand that because we reduced the factor of using those plants, the production factor, and so they become old, and we need to state on the level state of the future operation of those facilities. Will we use those units or not, power units? But the question is just on the crossroads between the government, the state enterprises, public enterprises, and the private business that are operating those power units. And also there's a pressure from legislation in local, national, and European legislation, a mechanism of CBAC, that is an additional pressure, which can be problematic when we think about how to operate the system. To support asymmetric development of the power system, it brought a reduction of volumes of the capacity, and also there was no sense to support a deficit capacity of Ukraine. You see the situation that we have recently, and it's reduction of a peak generation, that black line, and the growth of renewables. So that is the red line. So just the biggest dynamic of development that comes from renewables, although recently they slowed down, but anyways they are working, and we see that after that is not clear with payments for payments feed in tariffs. Now there is a quick development of plants which are like household plants, but also because of some violations, and industrial plants are developing, and they are brought like household plants, power plants. At present, there is a threat of a reduction of the capacity for balancing, for flexible capacity, and because it makes no sense. There are some reasons for that, because there is a reduction of time of work of plants, and also the participation in covering of the schedule, and also we can state the fact that thermal TPP are active only since November to the middle of March. All the rest of the period of the year, because there is a big part of renewables, so we have the work of TPPs, and there's only one unit is working, which is in operation, and they could the only Burstein TPP is working together with energy system of NSOE, and which has to balance for the island, because they don't have nuclear plants, and they they provide from 3 to 5 the work of 6 units, depending on the export from Burstein Island. Next slide, please. That's why we can state the fact that the threat of a big reduction of TPP is growing, because we need to work according for compliance with that national plan. And you see the variance of the development, future development, and we cannot say that that any PEP will not be complied. It will be complied, but there could be a road of modernization, or upgrading of TPP, or through phasing out. And the basic scenario that we consider in our report on adequacy, which shows that, like my colleagues told before me, that starting in 2023 we will have, or 24 we'll have less capacity of TPPs, and in 2025 we will not have enough of capacity of generation, and the only way to resolve the issue is only if we grow interconnectors from Europe for us to use that chance as to balance the system. Next slide. And but the main problem in the power system is a quick development of renewables, and a reduction of the part of TPP, and it brings it to the situation that we are forced to reduce renewables. It started in 2019 and 2020. It was even bigger in 2020, and this year is a sign, because the limits for renewables is higher than 300 million kilowatt hours, although we were prognosing that during the year we would have about 6 million kilowatt hours from renewables. Next slide. So to prognose, to forecast how to develop our power system. When we were preparing the report, we developed different scenarios how to develop a power system. And the main, which are reflected in, there are 4 scenarios in the report. Basic scenario, I told you about that it is unacceptable from the point of view that the system is already doesn't meet the requirements, and with climate neutral economy and with highest economic efficiency, and then basic scenario about which we think that the system should develop according to that scenario. All these scenarios, for all of them, we made calculations of maximal use and also possible restrictions and limitations in the future, and also forecast of production of generation in years and by 2030, and also forecast of the demand. As Maxim told, we have quite there will be not a big growth of demand for electric power, but will there be measures for on energy efficiency, which will help us to reduce or to fix the problems that could be more critical if they didn't introduce them?
Next slide, please. This slide gives you some of the key indicators related to the several scenarios mentioned. May I draw your attention to the low carbon scenario is the most challenging for Ukraine insofar as it demands a lot of investment, something that we are not likely to secure. So the reference scenarios look at slightly limited renewables, thermal plants in place, plus new technologies in order to support flexibility. Next slide, please. Apart from that, while looking at adequacy assessment, we also counted on interstate interconnections that even at the present condition of the system, 2 gigawatt exchange, which will reduce the amount of global investment in Ukraine's system with a view to balancing it. However, as we were developing the scenario, we counted on the availability of power from Europe, say. However, harsher winters may be challenging, and we couldn't take that into calculation. Of course, the price of electricity in Ukraine will go up if it is imported from Europe. Now, adequacy assessment. In the baseline scenario, the system will become inadequate in 2022, and in 2025 lead to deficiency, to shortfalls. Next slide. So main options that we have developed based on our modeling using Plexus is that both regulatory and production structure will need to be revised. All the We mean that the nuclear are not used in for flexibility purposes, but Energoatom has been considering for quite some time its contribution in daily regulation. Weekly has been the case for some time. It's easier and manageable for daily regulation. Energoatom will have to change the units. In addition, new technologies of generation and consumption need to be put in place in order to make them available for balancing if other capacities aren't available, and these are the technologies that Igor was talking about, the gas turbine, OCGT, and combined cycle, and the so-called virtual plants using consumers and plants being hooked to computer platforms that could provide control signals in real time. This seems to be one of the most efficient option, given that there is lack of clarity with regard to the source of finances for the implementation of new capacities. And naturally, if there were some market signals showing that the profitability of new commissions, then it'll be an advantage. But as long as our market is so much regulated as it is now, this is out of question. So energy saving is or reducing peak demand in the system, measures to reduce peak demand. Of course, this won't be able to resolve the issue of flexibility, but one of other important issues that the previous speaker mentioned is the need to have enough capacity to cover extreme peaks of consumption, such as we observed last year or beginning of this year, when there was shortage of capacity. So either CRM or that are actively introduced in Europe in spite of EC reservations, but in order to provide for consumer user security, they are accepted before any adequate market mechanisms can be identified and put in place. Next slide, please. Based on the modeling, the structure of generating capacities in the United Power System of Ukraine, shown in the previous slide, does have effect. Oh, I'm sorry, as you were. One of key assumptions that affect the system is the effective market rules and policies and mechanisms. Therefore, in our calculations involved in the baseline scenario, we looked at the need to support extension of coal-fired stations operations, the need to introduce fast start plants, its capacity reduced to 1 gigawatts, Also, in addition, capacity of renewable has to be increased, in particular wind and solar. Speaking of the solar, the introduction of new capacity should be balanced with the parallel introduction of the uh, storage capacities at the same site or in the facilities working parallel. And given from the financial situation of the system, the market companies operating in the market should think about technologies that are cost efficient, that be watchful of the market signals sent to potential investors so as to relieve the burden on the state or Ukrenergo, because the Ukrenergo rates aren't believed to be acceptable. The company is now in 30 million down in debt. Thank you, sir. Well, quite informative presentation. It's a pity we couldn't read it in terms of time, since Ukrenergo just warned us that renewables will have to be switched off, and currently it's something which is done systematically. So, in terms of time, when do you think the situation could be uh, ameliorated, not by reducing the demand, but by um, developing generation or upgrading coal-fired? Speaking of the time frame, well, within which our system can be changed, there are two issues: balancing market and delayed payments for to generation sold in the balancing market. When this issue is resolved, we can then boldly say that new generation, the revenues generated, but new generation in the balancing market is likely to be enough to demonstrate profitability, rate of return for these projects good to get started. The Both the regulator, Ukrenergo, are working towards the resolution of these issues, and we hope they will have been resolved by the end of this year. And if you ask Mr. Patrick, he will probably confirm that within the next 2 years, new generation can be put in place. Thank you. Vitaly, I've got a very short question regarding your estimates of the potential reduction to 1 gigawatt of the flexibles, renewables, if we compare wind and solar rates, and also take into account what Mr. Patrick was saying with regard to the thermal generation rates. The feed in, even at reduced rates, is higher than flexible capacity. So do you see it would be sensible to limit feed-in generation and pay them more for flexible? For me, it's, lacking in logic. In economic terms, there is no sense whatsoever here. And by the way, let me draw your attention to the calculations presented by Mr. Patrick, as well as ours. They fail to take into account the need to cover unserved supply. It is a forcible step to balance the system and to prevent the so-called green coal paradox. To this end, we've reduced carbon free to 82%. That's a daily figure if you look at our site. But this is not economically efficient way to secure maximum economic efficiency. We need to have more flexible generation in order to cover the peaks that renewables aren't capable of covering for the time being without limiting them. Thank you. Our viewers, I understand, have a question, and then we'll be drawing it to a close. Mr. Delabar on Facebook is asking the following question. After 2025, semi-peak or balancing capacity, is it somehow taken into account in the report? What are your views? Well, it's not taken into account in the report. We only look at 1 gigawatt additional construction. In our report, we provide a comment putting caps on renewables, and to achieve maximum efficiency, we need to increase up to 2 gigawatts or even more the flexible capacities. Further down the road, closer to 2030, when our obligation to pay for unserved renewables, the opportunities will increase. Well, recently I looked at the Spanish system operator adequacy assessment report, and they also provide that renewables will have to be restrained by 2030. Well, the draft report I looked at only said that the 1 gigawatt is the no, we can add. No, the number is 2 gigawatts. Another question from Daria Orlova on YouTube. The financial side, the balancing market debts of Ukrenergo, the government must have gotten itself confused with feed-in, right? So where do you get this money? This is additional money. So you and Ihar, Maxim, I understand, has already left. Well, regarding the debt and the balancing market, this is something that we are actively looking at. The nature of this debt is significant, like 2.7 billion hryvnia, is the debt of government-owned enterprises that are protected or semi-protected. There were the canals that failed to pay, and this is something that will have to be resolved at the level of the government. When it's done, we'll then probably be able to remedy the situation with other debts. With regard to renewable RES debt, again, challenging thing. It has been provided that energy will have to be covered from the electricity consumed, and the difference is covered by the Ukrenergo, but again, the mechanisms to be put in place are still being in definitions. So I understand that there is no clear answer as to where you get the money. Maybe you just save on paying the producers in the renewable sectors that underserve it. Regarding the financial mechanism, do you have anything to contribute? Well, one time we looked at the needed flexibility. About 3 years ago, we did this study, and it showed that this flexibility will yield significant savings, like 300 million euros per annum, at well the cost of reducing coal consumption. Through reducing hot reserves when coal-fired stations operate in suboptimum mode, and the cold reserve capacity does not use fuel. Plus, we did calculate, but this 300 million savings didn't include the savings you would get through limiting the renewables. There were significant numbers. Even in an ideal system and an optimized system, you will have to put some caps on renewables, but if you have this flexibility, you can eliminate. In other words, savings yielded by these measures will help uh, cover the cost significantly of introducing these flexible sources. Thank you. With this, we'll be drawing it to a close. Over to Sri. Thank you. There are two factors, if you ask me, that are unavoidable. First, there's this trend towards decarbonization. On the other hand, capex of renewable energy sources is the lowest, and the investment will go there. That is to say, if you invest in the least expensive generation, you will also achieve something which is now in trend globally. The ministry, I would like to note, is aware of this, and they're working on, so to speak, all-round comprehensive implementation, so that the system could, on the one hand, move towards decarbonization, and on the other hand, become more secure. Ihor was quite right when he said that consumption isn't likely to increase as compared to what we have now. It also is good to understand that technically and even economically you can model that a system with 83% of uh, green generation, as it were. So, and this may economically be justifiable as much as what we have today. Ukrenergo in its report is similar to private sector approaches, and this is also very good because it testifies to shared understanding. Once again, let me appreciate Wärtsilä's for their having been co-conveners of this decarbonization 1.0. Follow us. I hope our next releases will be as interesting and the one we had today, and will involve actors keen to invest in the decarbonized economy. Once again, thank you very much, our speakers, Mr. Co-moderator, all our conveners, and all those who followed us on social media. Well, over 100 viewers joined us. I hope that you'll stay with us next time we meet, when we invite representatives of the regulator. See you next time.